So this is our second webinar that we've done based around acoustics. The first one we did was a bit more of a general overview of the topic. And we decided here that that one went really well and we had a good response. So we thought maybe we'd hone in on a few different little things within that. So tonight, it's all about how to make your monitors sound better with acoustics. Before I go into it and introduce our guests tonight, as always, we have a special giveaway and promotion for everyone that's here tonight. But you do have to stick around to the end. I'm sure you'll want to anyway, but make sure you're here right till the end and you could be in the chance of winning something very exciting. But I think that's enough waiting for tonight. Don't forget to put your questions in the chat. Throughout the evening, there'll be lots to cover, and maybe you don't hear what you want or you missed something. So just make sure if there's anything you want to know, stick it in the chat, ask the question, and we'll get through as many as we can. So that's enough chat from me. Our special guest tonight is the wonderful Kevin Booth, joining us from Auralex Acoustics in the United States. For those of us that don't know, Auralex Acoustics were founded in 1977 on the ethos that acoustic products at the time were far too expensive and suffered huge disadvantages. Auralex wanted to change that. 45 years on, and Auralex are one of the leaders in acoustic treatment, manufacturing affordable and effective solutions to create an accurate recording and listening environment in almost any space. So without any further ado, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Well, this afternoon for you. How are you doing?
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. I'm doing great. And I'll try to remember that it's the evening for others and afternoon for the United States.
Well, I've already messed up with the time difference this evening already, so we're all off to a good start earlier. But are you well? You're good?
I'm doing great. Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for joining. As Robert said, Director of Sales and Marketing from Auralex Acoustics. And I've been a musician for many years, since a young child, in recording, and a room engineer and designer here. So I've been with the company for a little over 10 years. And I find this topic, and really all topics around acoustics, really interesting and enjoyable. Acoustic symmetry. And the first time you hear that phrase, you internalize that, but you think about it more and more as time goes on and how important that is. It's the equal distance from left to right, equal surface materials from left to right, and an open area around the listening position. And this is really important. Even without acoustic treatment, finding where the speakers sound best in the room is really important to set up success for acoustic treatment and success for you as a mixer and creator. So planning the placement of your acoustic treatment, you first measure the center from left to right where your monitors need to be. Adjust your seated position of 38% of the distance or length of the room. Measure and place the monitors, and seated position in an equilateral triangle. And the distance and wavelength work together to ensure that stereo image is accurate, sounds equal, and arrives to each ear on the left and right at the same time. And that's really important. You can see that in the diagram or the drawing, and then the bottom, please don't do this. So when you're set up in the corner, that's the opposite of what we're talking about. You have build up frequencies, and sometimes I understand it's where can you place your mix position in your home, but it's really what is important. And getting that equal symmetry is really important. So setting yourself up for failure really is in the corner. So we want to set you up for success. So please don't do that. And then the equilateral triangle. The speakers should be as far apart as the distance of the listening position. And then that triangle creates a 60-degree angle around the speakers. And that makes sure that everything arrives to this ear at the same time as that ear. Information, sound waves, vibration, however you want to characterize that. And that's really important. And you'll ask, what is that length? 5 feet is used a lot. I've heard 65 inches and 67.5 inches as being the optimal. I think that changes by room type and speaker type, particularly from a near field to a mid field monitor. This situation here that we've set up for the webinar is about 4.5 feet apart. And that's pretty comfortable for that desk size, monitor size. So less important is that distance than it being equal. And you can see where the head is at and where the peak of that triangle arrives. And when you found that spot, you can really tell the difference between the sweet spot, so to speak, in the center of that triangle or off axis to the left or right. And you should be able to hear that, and you will after you get this set up. So after you're set up for success there and speakers sounding the best they can be, you're still going to hear reflection and ambient in the room. A speaker emits energy out the front, of course, from the tweeter or the woofer, and that spreads around the room. That's your first reflections to your side and back of the room. But also very important is the speaker boundary behind the speakers. You'll see behind me are 2 monitors that I have 2 portable ProMax panels behind. And you can hear a marked difference between the lack of them and introducing them behind the monitors, because the cabinet emanates energy, and there's energy around that cabinet and the speaker that happens, and it gets perceived by your ear and brain as direct information from the speaker, and it's not. And as soon as you put treatment there, you can tell an immediate difference. And I will say that portable treatment is effective that way, because much like moving the microphone, you can move the treatment to where it needs to be, and it gives you an opportunity to really hear those changes. And anytime you're introducing acoustic treatment into the room, you should play music before, while, during, and after the placement, so you can hear those changes and relate to what they sound like. So those reflections from the front, the side, the left, and the right, all interpreted as direct information, and you'll hear that difference when you set that treatment up. And the next important thing to think about is, as I talked about the cabinet emanating vibrations and energy around it into the walls, its relationship to the surface it's resting on is very important. There's a lot of decoupling devices out there. This is a new one from Auralex called a ProPod. And it just prevents that energy, that vibration in that speaker cabinet from going into the surface it rests on, and that surface sympathetically vibrating as well, and that creating a tone that you hear, and again, perceived as direct information from the speakers, and it's not. And it's very important, and you can hear the difference, a huge difference between the lack of those ProPods and the surface. And here's some testing that we did to show that. So the black line is the surface, and you can see the way the surface reacts. That's a 28-inch shelf, similar to what is behind me here. We found that it's going to change by the shelf type, thickness, density, whether it's a speaker stand, a desk shelf. So this is relative to that, but remember, by surface type, it's going to change a little, but there is that effect. And you can see the change with the ProPod as it's used by diminishing those spikes, really, and evening things out. As you'll notice, 1K to 2K-ish is going to excite, it's going to attack. That's the attack of everything. It's going to be there, whether it's on a ProPod or not, or on the surface. But you can see it does diminish that a little too. So you don't have an over accentuated sound of that kick drum, for example, or snare drum. So going back, reflecting back to my original statement, as I said, acoustic symmetry, I think as more you internalize that, the more you think about that, the more important you understand it is, and how detailed you understand it. So the surface material types, what you learn in acoustics over time is that every surface material reacts to sound. And one of 3 things happen when sound hits a surface. It either reflects off, absorbs in, or transmits through. And it does a percentage and measure of all those things. And as you can imagine, glass is very reflective and very transmittable. It's not absorptive at all. So energy reflects off and some of it passes through. In this instance, though, we have a very symmetrical design of glass. So it's a way of using glass to your advantage, so to speak. At least on the left side and right side, they're equal. One thing I like to suggest is that if you have, say, a window on your left side And that has to be there. You can't change that window, and your best position is facing this way to put a framed picture of as equal size as you can find as that window. So you have those equal reflective surfaces. So you create that symmetry through absorption, through acoustic panels or reflective surfaces, just so that your left and right geometry is the same, surface materials are the same, and the reaction that you're getting from the speakers and the energy of the room, really important. Sometimes we're in a position where maybe we're not in the corner like I showed before, but we have a lack of symmetry in our space. And that's another way to take advantage of portable treatment, because we can create that symmetry by putting portable treatment around you and equaling out or getting better like surfaces, absorptive surfaces on your left and your right. So important thing to remember is the optimal listening position is the most important thing. It should be symmetrical and optimized with decoupling and acoustic treatment, equal surfaces, reflective surfaces around you. It should be comfortable and creative. It's not rocket surgery. The more you think about this, just the kind of the easier and simplistic it is. And it doesn't have to be an anechoic chamber to sound good. So I wonder if you guys have any questions. I'd take a moment to say that we have a podcast called Creative Spaces, and we talk about this stuff a lot with different artists and things, and just about the space and how the creativity of the space and the effectiveness of the space. And that includes acoustic treatment and sometimes doesn't, but you might find that fun. So any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you. If you want to stop sharing your screen, and we can just open this back up again to the floor. And yeah, we've got some great questions that have come in tonight, as well as some ones that we've sent over our socials throughout the past few weeks as well. But yeah, thank you very much for that. I think something that would be interesting for everyone to know is that these techniques, although very important, would you say that they are usable across all sorts of spaces, be it, you know, an office, a home studio, or a commercial studio? Are they transparent, and are they useful across all different spaces? And do they remain equally as important no matter the space that you have?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And more than one studio designer I've talked with have all said the same thing about finding out where the speakers need to live in the room. That really is the most important thing, to where the music sounds really good, then it can be creative. And then that acoustic treatment as added can complement that further. The 38% of the length of the room is pretty important for that mixed position. If you're at the middle of the room, you have cancellations in frequencies. And then if you're too far up to the front wall, you'll have some modes or some excitement of frequencies like 125 hertz and things like that. So the 38% is the best place to be. Yeah.
What about different types of music, depending on what you're working on, be it heavy metal, acoustic, classical music, or anything? What sort of difference does that make to the way that you acoustically treat your space?
Really none. Of course, there's going to be more information, say, in different frequency ranges, and a lack thereof in others. You know, there may be more low end frequencies in a program material and highs, but less in the mid range, but or vice versa. Or you may listen to one more audibly louder, and one may sound louder and more exciting. But really, when you break it all down, it's from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. That doesn't matter what the program material is, the surfaces in the room still react the same way, depending on what frequency is thrown at them. So it really is that important, whether it's film for TV post, or, you know, hip hop or metal or anything. You really should be able to pull up any of those program materials in your space and evaluate them, listen to them, and enjoy them, as well as work on them.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a common thing, is that a lot of questions we get is, you know, how important really is it depending on what I'm doing? And so ultimately, whatever you're producing, acoustic treatment is fundamental to your studio space.
Yeah.
So let's crack on with a few more of these questions then. In no particular order, I'm just going to bash through
Great.
some of these.
Yeah.
All right. So let's just see what we can get through.
Yeah.
So here we go. Do my monitor stands matter if I've got acoustic treatment?
They do. I prefer monitor stands, honestly. I prefer them because your ability to set up that triangle is really freed up. You can move them around where they need to be. And you might even take the approach where you set up your monitors in your chair and find that appropriate place and listen to your speakers in that space before you move the desk and other gear in there. Would be a really good approach. It is important. And I do prefer monitor stands. They're not all created equal. Some actually resonate. There are some with kind of a hollow metal steel tube. And that's fine. I use them too. I actually filled them with sand to keep them from resonating. If I clicked them with my finger, I could hear a tone. So that just, you know, whether not actually tested or heard it, but I was like, well, that tone exists from that, me clicking it, it exists from it vibrating. So to limit those vibrations is always good. MDF and wood all absorb better than say steel. So I would go for one of those or something that's really a heavy stand, because then you're anchoring that speaker, anchoring that stand down so there's less vibration. There's some stands with spikes that limit the contact points of the bass. There's a lot of detail to go into. Certainly the stands are preferred if you have that opportunity in this space.
And remember, guys, if you're not sure what type of stand you need or what you need for your space, you can always contact us here at Studiospares, and our acoustic specialists will be more than happy to assist you with what you need and what you don't need as well.
Yeah, you have your adjustable stands. Some are static. You have your speakers at a certain height. So your tweeters here, you want your tweeter even with your ear. That's the way all of your speaker manufacturers test them. So you want to hear them the way they test them. A side note, you generally don't want to lay your speakers on their side. Most speakers are designed to be vertically listened to. Very few are made to be in that horizontal location. If you have them on a desk, you'd certainly want to decouple them for sure. And you'd have a much tighter triangle probably at that point.
So on that note of monitors specifically, would you need or require more acoustics if the speaker is bigger?
Does depend on the room a little bit and how the room sounds. But typically, yeah, the speaker's larger, pushing more energy. There's more air in the room. It's probably producing more low frequencies. And if it does do that and your room is small, you certainly want acoustic treatment at that point. You can probably wavelength is a whole different webinar we could do. But for example, the wavelength of an 80 hertz frequency wave is 14.5 feet long. So it takes it one revolution. As the sound starts, it goes up, down, and back up where it started again. And that's one cycle for 80 hertz. And it's 14.5 feet. So if my room is 14 feet or 13 feet deep, because it's a small bedroom studio, etc., that frequency doesn't actually even develop before it meets a boundary. And as we talked about before, passes through, transmits or absorbs. Passing through and reflecting, is probably what that frequency is going to do and come back into your space. So yeah, you definitely need acoustic treatment with the more low frequencies you're producing.
Okay. All right, let's just keep going. For the questions come in thick and fast, so we're really
sorry. I'll make shorter answers then.
No, it's very important. It's good to hear
I kind of breezed
full information on it.
Slides,
so don't worry at all. So we have a question here from Nick from Wigan. I'm interested to know how you might integrate a separate subwoofer into a monitoring arrangement.
If it's just one subwoofer, the best thing to do is off to the left, not centered, but off to the left and behind that left speaker. Low frequencies that it produces from 80 hertz and below or crossover point might be 100, but really what you're asking from that subwoofer is 60 and 40 hertz. They're big sound waves and they're kind of omnidirectional because they're so big. Once they start to move through their cycle and they'll move around the room and around the boundaries and corners of the room, there's little directivity to low frequencies like that. So why the left side? It's just rule of thumb or good practice for the most part. And maybe it's because most of us are right-handed, so we hear better with our right ear. I don't know, but they will just kind of move around the room. So that's your best setup for that.
Okay. Well, staying on subwoofers, what is the best solution for a subwoofer with a downward firing port?
We get that question a lot. We have several devices or different devices. We have a Subdued and Subdued HT device that help decouple those. Actually, the ProPod I showed you earlier does a really good job of decoupling a subwoofer. And it doesn't matter whether it's front firing or down firing. In the down firing sub, its job is to do what I said before, spread out across the floor, the low frequencies, so they move about the room. And it's promoting that omnidirectional movement of that sound. So you can treat them the same way, and placement and decoupling there's no difference really.
Okay, all right, let's just reading through this one. This is quite a lengthy one, but let's just see if I can get through it. I'm just about to move into my studio space into a perpendicular walled room with tiles on the floor and a window at the far wall, which is slightly to the left behind where the monitors will sit. Instead of the window sitting completely symmetrically behind, do you have any advice for compensating for the window placement being slightly asymmetrical? Are rugs a good idea for the floor? Can they be manipulated for a recording by moving these around as well? Any good advice on this?
Yeah, kind of last at first. Rugs are always a good idea for a room like that. There's advantages to a room like that, probably if you're tracking in certain cases, if you track in the same room. Rugs definitely help. The thicker, the better. But, mitigating expectations or understanding expectations, that's really just high frequencies that they're helping with. So as long as there's symmetrical surfaces, they're easy to predict. The window, I would try to mimic the window. You probably don't want to cover it. A lot of people like to have a little bit of light in their space. I get that. Holistically, I would tell you to cover it, and you want, this, like we said, not an anechoic chamber, but a well-treated room. If you could repeat that window symmetrically on the right with a mirror, that'll help your space look bigger. You can look behind you, or a picture or anything that's going to reflect somewhat in the same way. That will certainly help.
Okay, well, I hope that answers your question. Again, if you need any further information on this, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. And
absolutely, even if that window is kind of recessed, you could put another piece of glass in front of it so it's more flat with the surface and more like the picture or mirror on the right.
So we have a Paul here whose listening position in their studio faces a sloped portion of the ceiling. Is the slope a help or a hindrance?
If the slope, if you're facing the slope and it rises behind you, that can be a nice space. It really can. That can work well. You may have some buildup in that corner back there, but not a lot. Actually, my home I bought because it sounded incredible, and the guy that lived in it before played in the symphony, and he thought the same. You get a lot of open spaces in homes that don't sound great. With vaulted ceilings, but when you have a ceiling that just goes this one direction, you kind of get an ambient to it, but not a lot of talk back. So you wouldn't want to face the other direction so that the ceiling slopes behind you. So certainly facing that way with the ceiling slope over your head and rising behind you is the best setup. And if that's not the length of the room, that's okay. We prefer firing down the length of the room because you're better set up for success, but being symmetrical in that space at 38% can be effective too.
So sort of staying on that idea of, you know, trying to create an acoustically treated space, no matter what your studio setup is. One of the questions we had over socials was, can you create an acoustically treated environment in any space? So no matter your type of studio, you know, is it possible to create an effective space?
I'm going to say no. I should say yes, right? Yes, just come to Auralex, we'll do it. You know, there are some bad ideas out there, right? There just are. We see them once in a while. There was a shipping container boom for a little while, and that there's some good and bad in that, you know, and the bad kind of being the obvious that its metal resonates like crazy. And when you get to treating that space, it becomes very much above 30%. And you lose a lot of real estate with that treatment. It's just not an exciting space for that anymore. So there are some, an abundance of concrete is not necessarily a good thing. Concrete seems to really excite 230, 250 Hertz. And pulling it out is just, you know, near impossible. So as we go back to surface materials, anytime you have a room that has an abundance of the same surface material, that kind of needs to be changed. A variance of surface materials and symmetricals is the best way to do that. And most spaces you can accomplish these things. So
that links quite nicely into this actually, which is I'm worried about adding too much treatment to my space. Is this possible? And can acoustic treatment to my monitors and space actually end up having a negative result? So I guess that sort of idea, you know, you're having too much of one material and, you know.
Yeah. I like to think of this as like mixing, right? So one guy's mix is not another guy's mix, you know, or gal, sorry. One person's mix is not another person's mix, you know, some like a really tight, compressed in your face sound of their mix, and some like a more open, less compressed sound for different music. So your acoustic treatment can be very much the same in cooking that soup and what you want to hear and what works for your ears. And you can do too much of it. Some like it really treated, but sometimes when you do a lot of acoustic treatment, inherently absorptive acoustic treatment is more effective at higher frequencies than low frequencies. And that's because higher frequencies are easier to tame. But in an effort to address these lower frequencies, we introduce so much absorption into the room. Again, our percentage of that surface material is much higher than any other percentage in the room. And we kind of overtreat high frequencies to address these low ones. And that would be a case of too much. That's actually why we sell diffusion. Then you bring reflection that is more predictable and desirable back in the room to correct that. So it can be a slippery slope. You could have too much, depending on the situation.
So it's about just sort of, I guess there's a certain element of trial and error as well within your space, and sort of, you know, not going too much all at once, and adding appropriately.
Yeah, if you want to, you know, if you want to do everything at once and put it on a budget, then, you know, contact Studiospares and they'll work with us, and we'll come up a design for you based on your space and images of your space and the room size and that. But if you want to experience those changes yourself one at a time, you can kind of cash flow it, buy treatment a little here at a time, and hear those changes and hear how the room is affected by it. And maybe have a better experience or understanding of the treatment that time.
Well, speaking about being on a budget, one of the questions here was, I don't have a large budget, but is it still possible to add successful acoustic treatment, either through DIY solutions or just the things that you have in your home? So I'm guessing maybe they're referring to here is stuff like their furniture and other bits like that, you know.
Yeah.
How much can you sort of proof your treat your room with just, you know, things that you have around the home?
You can do a lot. As soon the more you think about that symmetry, the more that you create it, you can set yourself up for success with things around the home. But, you know, curtains, even I don't know if we're turning beds up on their end, but different things around the house are soft surfaces, but to really address low frequencies that are a problem, acoustic treatment is really the only way to turn. And there are some DIY solutions as well of absorptive materials that can be covered and built. And those, same best practice. Too much is too much, even distribution of them, and equal and symmetry with those surface materials.
Okay, we've got a question here, which I'll just sort of elaborate on a little bit myself, is that a common misconception that we often come across is acoustic treatment and soundproofing being
Right.
completely, different kettles of fish here.
Right.
But within that, the question here was, what is the relationship between a thickness of a panel and frequency and absorbency? But are there any acoustic panels that have any soundproofing qualities within them? Is it possible to soundproof at all with your acoustic treatment, or are they completely far removed from each other?
They really are far removed. I stopped short of making any suggestions like that you can prevent sound from being heard in another room by any amount of acoustic treatment. We have had those requests though, where we want to do a vocal booth and they want 100% of Auralex studio foam all over the place. And there can be an advantage to that. It can help, but really actual soundproofing, preventing sound leakage from one room from another, is a bolstering of materials that absorb and decouple, as well as isolating that space, kind of creating a fish tank. The rule being that if fill the room with water, wherever the water go, that's where sound goes to. So we don't, and I don't make any suggestion that any amount of wall panels in a space cannot help isolate it. We've tried with some different materials, and there's some suggestions out there with sheet block laminate on the back and things, but no, you get one or the other, or you reconstruct the space.
Yeah, I guess then you're starting to look at a much bigger budget and everything.
Yeah.
In that sort of case. So,
Yeah.
So
now, one thing's true though, a properly isolated room, that's room within a room construction without any acoustic treatment on the walls, already sounds better. Just because it's absorbed, decoupled, everything is really, you have no noise floor from outside. So it's really, when you talk about setting up for success, really set up for success, and probably needs less internal acoustic treatment because of all that work.
Well, I think we've just about at the end we've had a few more questions, but they're covering things we've already gone across. But if you feel that maybe you haven't had your question answered or not fully enough for you, don't hesitate to get in touch with us at the email that's going to be in here, sales@studiospares.com, and either we'll try and answer it for ourselves, by ourselves for you, or we'll get in touch with Kevin and the team at Auralex and see what we can do. But we have one last question here. I think it's a really interesting question, actually. It's not something I personally have come across from answers or anything elsewhere, but I have a mild hearing problem in my right ear. Is the triangle still right for me, or do I keep the triangle and look at treatment to help me achieve the best setup? So yes, do the sort of rules and how you treat a room differ in this case? If you maybe are sort of partially deaf in one ear, or how does that get affected?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start by saying that's not a question I've considered, but my first thoughts are that you should still set up the triangle. You should still do all the things that we're doing. But if you can, with your doctor, help determine kind of what the dB difference is between that ear and that ear, to adjust the output of your right speaker to match. Reason being is that this sound energy is about physics and time arrival, and when a sound reaches this ear and reaches that ear, depending on what frequency it is. So I think if you have attenuation in this ear, you probably just need to bump up that speaker a little bit to match the left one. And maybe your doctor can help with kind of where the ballpark of that dB difference is, but you're going to know the best from just listening to program material, and continue trial and error until you get it right. because a surface, despite your differences in your ear, the surfaces in the room and the energy coming from the speakers are always going to react the same, and you want them to react in equal parts. So I think that should be the approach.
Yeah, certainly interested myself to find out a little bit more about that. And if when you do sort of find your solution and best way to tackle that, we'd love to know. We'd be very interested in sort of how you came by that. And
Yeah.
oh, sorry, there's actually a question here that's been asked twice and I've missed it both times. Mike here has just passed it through. So we'll just get one last question for you, all right? And then we'll let you go. This has just been a bit quick fire question round at you, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the question was, here we go. So, what is the relationship between thickness of panel versus frequency absorbency?
It's really important. So thickness and density. Density kind of being a different thing of whether it's compressed, whether it's fiberglass or studio foam material. And not all foam materials are created equally. So there's some stuff you can buy that is really just, like we always say, bedding foam or something. It's not really designed to absorb. So acoustic companies like ours and Studiospares take their time to make sure that absorbs correctly. But a 2-inch material absorbs fairly linear, but a little more in the 5K range. So a 4-inch material is going to absorb more frequencies from 500 hertz down to 8 in its noise reduction coefficient or its absorption coefficients across frequencies. And you can look at us on our website for testing, kind of show that and show the difference. So yes, the thicker the material, all the way up to 6 inches in a combination of thicknesses of material will absorb more. So the thicker you get, the lower frequencies, more low frequencies that are absorbed. And sometimes when you vary the densities, you even improve that further across frequency bands. So say a loose fiberglass, like an R13, absorbs really well at low 60-40 hertz. But then like a Pro Panel, Auralex Pro Panel is a dense, hardened fiberglass that, as I said before, is pretty linear, but starts to drop off a little after 500 hertz. So the two together can create a pretty impressive absorber. Or the Pro Panel with mineral fiber behind it, with mineral fiber is looser, even though it's 2-inch or 4-inch behind that, also can get you a more linear response from 5K all the way down. So it definitely is about density and thickness.
Well, Kevin, thank you very much. I mean, it's evident here that there's a lot that we can cover, but unfortunately we don't have all the time in the world. But maybe this is a great opportunity for hopefully get you on again in the future. But I feel like we've just scratched the surface here on what is a very in-depth topic. But
yeah, it is a long conversation. Perhaps wavelength, that's something to look into, just to understand that sound arrives at different times and travels differently across frequency ranges.
And of course, guys, if there's something you haven't heard here, or something you're hoping to maybe find out, or something you just maybe realize this evening you're interested in, do drop us an email at sales@studiospares.com, and we'll definitely, compile these ideas together and try find the solutions for you and get another webinar together. Guys, thank you so much to all of you for joining us, and Kevin, thank you to you and all the team for this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on for the webinar. Again, I feel like we've just scratched the surface, so we'll definitely be in touch with you in the future, and hopefully you'll join us again, because
I would be happy to. Thank you, everyone.
We have a lot to cover. So no, thank you very much again. If there's anything you missed, it's sales@studiospares.com or studiospares.com, and our phone number's on there, and you can get in touch with us and we'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions. But until next time, our next webinar will be slightly different from normal. Normally do it at the beginning of the month, but it will actually be in the middle of June, where our managing director, Dave West, and sales manager, Mike O'Neill, will be doing a NAMM roundup. So do come on and check that out. Registration will be out soon, so make sure you're on our mailing list, and we'll be contacting you all about joining us, and we'll hopefully see you all again soon. My name's Rob, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.